In the heart of Detroit, the auto garage was a hive of noise, metal clanging, air compressors hissing, and voices calling out part numbers over the din. The smell of oil and grease mixed with the faint scent of burnt rubber from a recent test drive. Mechanics hustled from one station to another, their coveralls streaked with sweat and grime. But in the far corner, the atmosphere was different. A stunning silver sports car sat on a hydraulic lift, its hood up like an open secret. The engine gleamed, yet seemed stubbornly silent, a mechanical riddle no one could solve. The car belonged to Richard Lane, a billionaire CEO known for his ruthless business instincts and taste for the extravagant. Tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, he stood with his arms crossed, watching the frustrated mechanics give up one by one. "Fix this engine, and I'll give you $1 million, he said with a grin that suggested he didn't believe it was possible. His tone was half challenge, half mockery, a dare to prove him wrong. Around him, the workers chuckled, assuming it was just another rich man's game. Richard's words weren't taken seriously. To most in the garage, the challenge was a joke, an impossible puzzle meant only to amuse its owner. They knew the car's origin, an unreleased prototype from a European manufacturer, rumored to have an engine design unlike anything on the market. The mechanics had tried everything, replacing sensors, recalibrating timing, even stripping parts down to their core, and still, it refused to start. Each failure only made Richard's smirk grow wider, but there was one pair of eyes studying the car differently. Emily Grant stood by the wall, unnoticed by most. She was just 12 years old, wearing jeans 2 sizes too big and a faded hoodie with the sleeves pushed up. Her father, a mechanic at the garage, often brought her along after school. While others saw a child killing time, she saw herself as an apprentice, soaking in every sound, every tool, every conversation about torque and compression ratios. Today, she wasn't looking at the broken sports car with doubt. She was looking with curiosity. The car was unlike anything Emily had seen before, yet it whispered familiar patterns. She noticed the unusual wiring beneath the hood, the placement of components that didn't match typical designs. She remembered something her father once told her: engines speak a language. You just have to learn how to listen. She walked a little closer, careful not to get in the way, her sharp eyes tracing every visible part. She could tell there was a logic to the arrangement. It wasn't broken, just misunderstood. Richard caught sight of her. "What's this? We've got a new volunteer," he said with a raised eyebrow, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A few mechanics laughed, one muttering, "Careful, boss, she might show us all up." Emily didn't react to the teasing. Instead, she stepped closer, hands behind her back, and asked, "Do you have the full spec sheet for this model?" The room went quiet for a second. No one expected a 12-year-old to use words like spec sheet in the middle of a high-stakes repair job. Richard tilted his head, amused. "And what would you do with that, kid?" he asked. Emily shrugged. "You can't fix what you don't understand. I just want to see how it's supposed to work before guessing what's wrong." The CEO chuckled, impressed despite himself, and signaled to his assistant to hand her a folder from the car's glove compartment. The mechanics watched in disbelief as she opened it on a nearby workbench, flipping through pages covered in technical diagrams and handwritten notes in a foreign language. Emily studied the drawings, tracing lines with her finger, mumbling to herself about circuits and compression. Her father, who had been working on another car, walked over slowly, unsure whether to stop her or let her try. "Emily," he began, but she cut him off gently. "Dad, this intake system isn't even connected to the right manifold. It's like it was reassembled wrong after shipping." She glanced back at the car, her mind already assembling a mental blueprint of how it should look. Richard leaned in, suddenly more attentive than before. Without waiting for approval, Emily grabbed a small toolkit from her father's bench. She slid on a pair of gloves that were far too big for her, the fingertips flopping awkwardly, and climbed onto a low stool to reach the engine bay. The mechanics exchanged glances, half amused, half curious, while Richard folded his arms and watched. She worked slowly, unscrewing a panel here, adjusting a connector there. Her movements were deliberate, not the random poking most adults might expect from a kid. It was clear she knew which parts to touch and which to leave alone. Her father hovered nervously, ready to step in if she made a mistake, but Emily kept going, occasionally referencing the spec sheet she had placed on the fender. She unplugged a sensor, inspected it, and swapped it with a matching one from a secondary assembly. Then she adjusted the throttle body, murmuring something about airflow inefficiency. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she didn't stop. Other mechanics leaned closer now, their earlier smirks fading into curiosity. This wasn't just a child tinkering, this was method. Richard's amusement shifted into interest. He had seen countless mechanics give up in frustration, but this girl seemed to approach the problem differently, almost like she was solving a puzzle instead of repairing a machine. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked casually. Without looking up, Emily replied, "From watching and listening. My dad taught me the basics, but engines, they tell you what they need if you pay attention." Richard raised an eyebrow. It was an oddly profound answer for someone who had only just entered her teenage years. After nearly 40 minutes of work, Emily stepped back and handed her father the wrench. "Can you try it now?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, glancing at Richard, who nodded. The garage fell silent as her father slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low, throaty growl, the engine roared to life, smooth, powerful, and without a single misfire. The sound filled the garage, and every head turned toward the little girl who had just done what no one else could. Emily didn't smile right away. She listened intently to the rhythm of the engine, nodding to herself as if confirming her diagnosis. "You'll want to replace that secondary sensor soon," she said, matter-of-factly, "but it should run fine for now." Her father looked at her with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Richard, on the other hand, was momentarily speechless. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look that was part admiration, part astonishment. The room was still buzzing with the engine's hum when he finally spoke. "Well, I'll be damned," Richard said with a chuckle. "You just made me owe a 12-year-old $1 million. The mechanics laughed, but it wasn't mocking anymore. It was the kind of laugh that came from being genuinely impressed. Emily finally allowed herself a small grin, though she didn't say anything. Richard stepped closer, extending his hand like a man greeting a worthy rival. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. She shook his hand and replied simply, "Emily." The CEO nodded slowly, as if committing the name to memory. In that moment, the garage felt different. The boundaries between billionaire and mechanic, adult and child had blurred. Here was a girl who didn't just surprise everyone, she redefined what they thought was possible. Richard glanced at his assistant. "Write her a check," he said half to himself, but there was something else in his eyes, something that suggested the money wasn't the real prize. He was already thinking of possibilities, of ways. This extraordinary girl might be part of something much bigger than a repaired engine. Emily, however, wasn't thinking about million-dollar checks or future opportunities. She was thinking about how the car sounded now alive, ready and perfectly tuned. She knew engines like this weren't just machines, they were stories, waiting to be told, challenges waiting to be met. And today she had met one head-on. As the rumble of the sports car filled the air, she stepped back, wiping her hands on her hoodie, unaware that her life had just shifted in a way she couldn't yet imagine. The crowd of mechanics and workers leaned closer, some exchanging skeptical glances, while others whispered in disbelief. Emily's brow furrowed with focus, her hands moving with a precision that seemed impossible for someone her age. She unplugged a diagnostic cable from the engine's central board, then carefully reattached it in a different sequence. Sparks of electricity flickered as the system rebooted. The garage went silent, except for the rhythmic tapping of her small wrench. She tightened the final bolt and stepped back, her expression calm but expectant, as if she knew exactly what was about to happen. Richard Lane raised an eyebrow, still doubting her. "You really think you fixed what 10 of my top engineers couldn't?" he asked, crossing his arms. Emily didn't, and so with words she pressed the ignition button. The engine hummed to life, smooth and powerful, the futuristic purr filling the room like a living heartbeat. Mechanics gasped, some stepping forward to confirm it wasn't a trick. The diagnostic screen lit up in green across the board. Every system check passed. Richard's jaw tightened as he realized she had done the impossible. Emily's father, Jack, who had been lingering by the door with slumped shoulders, froze when he heard the sound. His eyes widened, disbelief flooding his face. He rushed forward, unable to process what he was seeing. "Emily, you—" His voice broke, half pride, half shock. Emily turned toward him, smiling shyly. "It was the torque sensor in the secondary energy loop. I remembered seeing it in the hybrid manual we read last winter." Jack blinked, stunned that his daughter had not only remembered such technical detail, but had acted on it flawlessly. The CEO stepped closer, his smirk gone. "You said you had a spare?" he asked, glancing at the small part now resting on his workbench. Emily nodded. "It's from an old project I was working on at home. Same make, just smaller. I adapted it." Richard studied her for a moment, almost as if trying to figure out whether she was some kind of prodigy or if this was a miracle of chance. "How old are you?" he asked. 12, she replied simply. The word hung in the air like an accusation against every professional who had failed before her. A ripple of laughter and cheers spread among the garage workers, many of whom were quick to offer Emily high fives and pats on the back. Some shook their heads, embarrassed that they had dismissed her earlier. Jack put a hand on her shoulder, feeling more pride than he could ever put into words. Richard, however, was quiet, looking down at the running engine as if it had revealed something about himself. He had made the offer of $1 million as a joke, a way to show no one could meet his challenge. But now, the joke was on him. He straightened his tie and cleared his throat. "Well," he said slowly, "a deal is a deal." Jack's mouth fell open. "Wait, you mean—" But before he could finish, Richard turned to his assistant. "Get the checkbook and make it out to Emily Carson." The room erupted in stunned gasps. Emily's heart skipped, her mind struggling to process the idea of that much money. Jack shook his head, trying to refuse. "Sir, you don't have to—" But Richard cut him off. "I said it. She did it. That's the kind of honor I built my business on." The assistant returned with a leather folder, placing it in Richard's hands. He signed without hesitation, then held the check out to Emily. She stared at it, then at her father, unsure what to do. Jack took it gently, his hands trembling. This will change everything," he whispered. Richard smiled faintly. "It should, but honestly, I'm more interested in what's going on in that brain of yours," he said, nodding at Emily. "Ever thought about designing engines instead of just fixing them?" Her eyes lit up, the idea blooming in her imagination like sunlight breaking through clouds. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside the garage felt warm with energy and possibility. Emily couldn't stop replaying the moment in her head, the way the engine had roared back to life, the disbelief in everyone's faces, the rush of knowing she had done something no one else could. Jack slipped the check into his jacket, still dazed. "We're going to fix the roof," he murmured to himself, "and get the shop back up to code, maybe even higher." "Help!" Emily beamed, realizing that her quick thinking had saved not just a car, but their future. Richard wasn't finished. "Emily," he said, his tone softer now, "I'd like to offer you something else." She tilted her head. "What's that?" He gestured toward the sports car. "A seat in my company's junior engineering mentorship program. You'll have access to the same labs and equipment my top team uses, and if you want, I'll personally sponsor your education all the way through college." The room fell silent again, every mechanic realizing just how rare such an offer was. Emily's mouth opened slightly, but she couldn't find the words. Jack put an arm around her, his voice low. "Sweetheart, this is huge." Emily looked up at Richard, still trying to process. "I'd like that," she finally said, her voice small, but steady. Richard nodded. "Good, then we'll start next week." He glanced toward the running engine, shaking his head again. "And 12 years old," he muttered, almost to himself, "and she saw what my entire R&D team missed." Emily smiled faintly, her mind already turning over ideas for the next challenge she might face. For the first time, she felt like her skills weren't just a hobby, they were a gift. The workers slowly returned to their stations, but the buzz of excitement didn't fade. Whispers of genius and born mechanic floated through the air. Jack couldn't stop looking at his daughter, wondering how he had been lucky enough to raise someone so sharp, so fearless. Emily kept glancing at the sports car, listening to the steady rhythm of its engine like it was music. Richard gave her one last nod of approval before stepping into his limousine, leaving with a look that suggested he had just witnessed the start of something much bigger than a repaired vehicle. That night, as they drove home in their beat-up pickup, Jack kept stealing glances at Emily. "You know, you've got more courage than most grown men I've met," he said. Emily laughed softly. "I just wanted to try. I didn't think it would actually work that fast." Jack smiled. "That's the thing about people like you. You make the impossible look easy." They pulled up to their small garage, the sign hanging crooked, the paint peeling. But tonight it didn't look tired or broken. It looked like the beginning of something new. Emily hopped out of the truck and looked up at the stars, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. She thought about the mentorship program, the check, and the fact that she had proven herself in front of one of the most powerful men in the city. But more than that, she thought about how it felt to have people believe in her. Jack came around the side of the truck, draping an arm around her shoulders. "Come on, kiddo, we've got work to do tomorrow." She smiled, knowing he didn't just mean fixing cars, he meant building dreams. As they stepped into the dimly lit garage, Emily's gaze fell on the workbench where she had first learned to turn a wrench. The tools were worn, the manuals dog-eared, but they were hers. She picked up the small screwdriver she had used earlier and turned it over in her hand. It wasn't just a tool, it was a reminder that even the smallest things could change the biggest outcomes. She set it down gently, then looked at her father. "Dad," she said, "one day we're going to build our own car, from scratch." Jack's eyes shone. "And I'll be right there beside you." The world outside their little shop might have been filled with billionaires and high-tech labs, but Emily knew she had something they didn't: heart, determination, and the ability to see possibilities where others saw dead ends. She had fixed more than just an engine that day. She had repaired her father's. Hope reshaped her own future, and shown everyone watching that greatness doesn't wait for age or permission. It comes from rolling up your sleeves, trusting what you know, and daring to try when no one else will. The moment the engine roared, it was as if the entire garage froze in place. The deep, steady hum of the machine filled the air like music, echoing off the metal walls. Every mechanic in the room, hardened by years of experience and failures, stared in disbelief. Even the smell of hot oil seemed sweeter in that moment. Emily stepped back, wiping her hands on her jeans, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure whether she should smile or cry. Her father stood near the doorway, his mouth slightly open, eyes glistening as if he'd just witnessed a miracle. Richard Lane, the powerful CEO who had moments earlier mocked the idea that anyone could fix this car, stood frozen for several seconds. His smirk was gone, replaced with something Emily had never seen on a man like him: awe. He walked slowly toward the car, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete floor. His fingers brushed the hood almost reverently, as though confirming the engine was truly alive. "How did you—" he stammered, his voice unusually quiet for someone so commanding. The entire garage seemed to lean forward, waiting for her answer. Emily just shrugged, a small, confident smile tugging at her lips. "It wasn't that hard," she said softly, though in truth her mind was still racing from the adrenaline. She had seen the problem almost instantly, a misplaced sensor in the hybrid system. Something so small, yet so crucial, it made her wonder how so many skilled mechanics had missed it. But Emily wasn't like most mechanics. She didn't just see machines. She understood them as if they could speak. Richard straightened, shaking his head slowly, as though trying to wake himself from a dream. Then, without another word, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a checkbook. The scratching of his pen against paper filled the air. He tore out the slip and walked toward her. The paper was thick, the ink bold. $1,000. He handed it to her with both hands, almost ceremoniously. "A deal's a deal," he said firmly, but his eyes held something more than respect. They held curiosity and, perhaps, a spark of admiration. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Jack, Emily's father, stepped forward, his rough hands trembling as he looked at the check. "Sir, we can't possibly," he began, but Richard cut him off with a raised hand. "You can, and you will. This is payment for a job done better than anyone else could manage, but the money isn't all I'm offering." He paused, studying Emily, as though weighing her future in his mind. "Emily, how would you like a full scholarship to the best engineering school in the country?" The words hit Emily harder than the $1,000,000 check. Her breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of going to such a school, but she knew her family could never afford it, not even close. Jack's eyes filled with tears, and he looked down, trying to hide them. Emily glanced between her father and Richard, unsure if this was still reality or some dream she would wake from. You serious?" she whispered. Richard smiled faintly. "Dead serious." One of the senior mechanics chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Kid, you've got a gift. I've been working on engines for 30 years and I've never seen anything like that." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she felt a warmth inside that she couldn't explain. For so long she had been the kid in her father's small shop, overlooked by customers and dismissed by other mechanics. Today, she had proven she belonged not just in a garage, but in the world of engineering. She wasn't just a helper, she was a problem solver. Jack put an arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "I told you, Emily, it's not about how small you are. It's about how big your ideas can be," he whispered. Emily leaned into him, feeling the rough fabric of his worn work shirt against her cheek. In that moment, the $1,000,000, the scholarship, none of it mattered as much as knowing her father was proud. The rest was a bonus, a dream she could barely comprehend. Richard cleared his throat, breaking the emotional spell. "I'd like you to come see my company headquarters," he said. "I want you to meet our head engineers, tour our R&D department. If you can fix this, I can only imagine what else you're capable of." Emily blinked, stunned by the invitation. Jack hesitated, unsure if this was too much too soon, but Emily's nod was small and certain. "I'd like that," she said. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew this was the start of something far bigger than a single repaired engine. The rest of the garage slowly returned to life, but the energy was different now. Mechanics approached Emily, asking questions, shaking her hand, even asking if she could look at other tricky jobs. She answered shyly, unused to being the center of attention. Jack accepted quiet congratulations from a few friends, though his mind kept drifting to how everything had changed in the span of an afternoon. A future that had once felt uncertain for both him and Emily now seemed wide open. As they prepared to leave, Richard handed Jack his business card. "Call me on Monday," he said firmly. "I want to get her started on the scholarship paperwork right away. And Jack, you should be proud. Not many people can say they raised a daughter like this." Jack's throat tightened as he took the card, slipping it into his pocket like it was the most valuable thing he owned. Emily, still clutching the check, felt the weight of it not in dollars but in opportunity. Walking out of the garage, the late afternoon sun hit their faces. Emily squinted up at the sky, feeling the cool Detroit breeze brush against her cheeks. She knew life wouldn't be the same after today, but she also knew something else. This was only the beginning. The $1 million would help her family. But the scholarship meant she could turn her gift into something lasting, something that could change lives, and she was ready for it. Jack glanced down at her as they reached their old pickup truck. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "Yeah, Dad. I think I'm more than okay." She slid into the passenger seat, holding the check like it was a treasure map leading to her future. Jack started the engine, and as they pulled away, Emily took one last look at the garage where it had all happened. The place where a dare had turned into destiny. The roads ahead felt different now, not just stretches of cracked pavement, but pathways to something greater. Emily imagined the engineering labs, the prototypes, the endless machines waiting to be understood. She imagined herself not as a girl in grease-stained jeans, but as a professional engineer, maybe even designing cars like the one she had just repaired. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was capable of more than anyone had ever believed. As the city's skyline came into view, Jack reached over and squeezed her hand. No words were needed. The pride in his eyes said everything. Emily smiled, leaning back in her seat, the hum of the truck's old engine mixing with the distant sound of possibility. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she could still hear the sports car's perfect roar, a sound that would forever remind her that even the biggest challenges could be solved with determination, skill, and a belief that nothing was impossible.